Hello everybody and welcome to the Code Wrinkles channel for a brand new video. Once again it will be about Blazor, because Blazor is the real new cool thing right now in the .NET Core world. So I think it is useful to just spend a little bit of time and try to understand how actually Blazor works and what it can actually do for us. So we'll start today and we'll talk about a very important topic that I think it might be a lot of times misunderstood, especially by those who might be newer to Blazor, and it's about hosting models. And it's very important because there are two different types of hosting models when we talk about Blazor, but each hosting model comes with also some very specific flavors. So that's why in this video I want to just go through all the specific hosting models to theoretically understand how they are supposed to work, but then also put everything into some context and just fire up some Blazor apps for each of the hosting model types and see with our own eyes what are the differences, so that we can understand if we really want to start a new Blazor project, which would be the best way to go. So when it comes to hosting models, we basically have two types of hosting, and it's the server-side Blazor, or the Blazor that runs on the server, and it's the Blazor WebAssembly. Now these two types of hosting models are very different in one way, but the programming model behind when we really work on our Blazor app, on our components and so on, they are really the same, so they are really not different at all. However, if we think about these two different hosting models, what we can say is that when we think about this Blazor WebAssembly, it basically ships your DLLs, your C# files, to the browser, and the application runs there in the browser. We can assume that we have one UI thread, so this application will surely be single-threaded because browsers are single-threaded. It's the same like when we do JavaScript apps. But the difference is that in this case we don't run JavaScript in the browser, but we run our Blazor application. So once again, in this case, all our DLLs for our application, so everything that we need to have this application working, will be shipped to the browser and will be executed there. Now in the server-side hosting model that you can see here on the right side, we have basically two different components. We have first of all an ASP.NET Core application, or an ASP.NET Core server, that ships, of course, our Blazor application to the browser, but actually what it ships is only the initial, let's say, startup or the initial files, because all the rendering will happen on the server. So you might then ask yourself, okay, but how do Blazor components then arrive to the browser? And here comes the trick. In this server-side hosting model, basically between the browsers, or between the front end and the back end, there is a signal-R connection, and every time you click a new button, for instance, in your Blazor application, what it happens behind is that this information or this event travels to this through this signal-R connection. Then on ASP.NET Core we compute the new things, the new HTML that should be rendered based on the event that just happened, and then the differential HTML, so only the changes that are needed, are sent back to the browser via the same signal-R connection. So the main advantage here is that all rendering and all logic is done, all processing is done on the server side, and all UI modifications are transmitted via this signal-R connection, which is very interesting. However, when we just try to think about a little bit the Blazor WebAssembly model, it actually comes with a different flavor. And here we see that we have basically two options to run Blazor WebAssembly applications. So the first way we can do that is simply run a standalone Blazor application in the browser. Just as a really not very accurate, but I think important analogy, is that we basically in this scenario just run Blazor as a static files application. So we just ship some information to the browser and our application basically runs there with really no connection or no ties to some backend application or server. It just runs. And then we have the second scenario, which is still for Blazor WebAssembly, but in this case we have a Blazor WebAssembly application that is hosted by ASP.NET Core. What this actually means is that we have behind, or we have a backend, an ASP.NET Core backend, that when requested ships our Blazor application to the UI. Once the Blazor application is shipped to the UI, of course it behaves like a regular and normal Blazor WebAssembly application. So all the DLLs that you need for that Blazor frontend app are there, and everything runs single-threaded in the browser. The only difference here is that we have basically a backend, an ASP.NET Core backend, and a Blazor frontend, the Blazor WebAssembly application. And this would be, I would guess, the most common scenario when you really want to develop production applications, because normally you almost never just write a blank static front-end application. Even if we think about Angular, for instance, we usually have Angular in conjunction with a backend server. We can have it with ASP.NET Core, but we can have it also with Node.js and so on. The important thing here is that if you run Blazor standalone, so just the static files shipped in the browser, then you have some obvious limitations, because you cannot do things like server-side pre-rendering and other similar stuff that might be very useful for different type of scenarios. You would most probably also have problems with CORS, with cross-origin resource sharing, since your application, as your Blazor application, will run on a certain host. But then if you need to make call, because you surely need to make call to APIs, then those APIs will be probably on a separate backend server, on a separate host, and so on. All these problems are solved if we run ASP.NET Core backend with Blazor frontend, which once again would be, I guess, the most common and the widely used scenario. So let's now maybe go one step further and go back to Visual Studio actually, to see exactly how this type of hosting models affect the way that actually Blazor is working. And what we have here, I already opened 3 different Blazor applications that represents like the different hosting models, plus the idea of running Blazor hosted in ASP.NET Core. The first application that I would like to take a look at is the Blazor server application. And here we just have one project. We have a startup file, and the way that you can basically recognize if an application is a Blazor server application is that in this configure services method on the startup class, you usually have this add server-side Blazor. This adds all the necessary services to run Blazor on the service on the server. However, also in the middleware, in the middleware where we configure endpoints, we have here also this endpoints map Blazor hub. And this basically maps the signal R Blazor hub that will maintain a WebSocket connection open between the server and the front-end application. And as said, all the rendering logic of the components will happen on the server, and all the communication regarding what needs to be sent or what needs to be updated in the browser application will be sent through this WebSocket connection. So these are really very two important points too, that from which you can recognize that, okay, this application is actually a Blazor server application. So if we run this application, and it should start shortly, and I also press F12 to open the developer tools, and here it's still loading, and here in network we can basically see that we don't download any DLLs. But another thing that we can see maybe better in the console is that we have opened a WebSockets connection to our server. And this is the way from now on through which the browser application, so our Blazor application, communicates with the server. So basically what it happens there, for instance, right now, if I click on counter, this information is sent to the Blazor server, and then on the Blazor server, the new HTML is rendered that needs to be displayed. In this case, it would be only the update of the central part where we display the counter, and then the differential HTML, so only the changes, the modifications, are sent back to the browser via the same SignalR connection. Now, exactly the same things happens if we click on this button, on this click me. This should increment the count. Now once again, when I hit this button, what it happens is that behind, through that WebSockets connection, this information is sent to the server that, hey, that button was clicked, right? And then of course on the server side we compute the differential HTML or the updates that need to be sent to the client application or to the browser, and then this information is sent on the browser. In this case it would be only the updated count, which in this case will be 1. And once again, if I click on click me once again, it happens exactly the same thing. If I click on fetch data, it happens exactly the same thing. So this information goes or travels through this WebSockets connection to the server. The server computes the differential HTML that is needed, and then it is sent back through the same WebSockets connection to the browser where it is displayed. So in this scenario, you can see that all the communication between the browser and the server happens through that WebSockets connection, and everything that regards components, how components are rendered, how things are basically done here, happen on the server and are just then forwarded, or the result is transmitted to the browser via that WebSockets connection, which is fairly cool, I guess, and that would be very helpful in a lot of different scenarios. Now let's take a look maybe at this second application, which is regular Blazor standalone application. So once again, it is a standalone application. It's just Blazor. The binaries are just shipped to the browser when we run the application, and then everything runs in the browser directly there through WebAssembly, of course. So if we right now hit the debug button so that we start this application, I will also start once again the developer tools, and let's take a look at this network tab. Now, not a lot of things happen here because in my case, probably a lot of information is cached already in the browser, as I mentioned in a previous video. But if I open a new in private session for this browser, and I also wanted, sorry, I was just a little bit too late. So let's open a new in private session for a Chrome, and just try to request this URL again. And you see that in this case, all the DLLs are shipped to the browser. So once again, when we had the Blazor server applications, no DLL, no Blazor DLL was shipped, or actually no DLL was shipped to the browser. But in this case, when we have this standalone application, we see that everything that my application needs to run was shipped here in this browser, and now everything works from here. And the cool stuff about this Blazor WebAssembly standalone applications is that whenever you refresh, basically all the content is already cached. So basically you don't download it once again. This means that the second time or third time that you will try to access this application, unless you clear your browser cache, you will only download a very few things that you need for this application to work. And then of course it's exactly the same thing, but with the main difference that right now everything happens in the browser. So when I right now click this click me button, the fact that I should update the current account is computed directly in the browser. So there is no round trip at all to the server. As we can see here in network, nothing happens when we click this button. And even if I go on home, whatever, nothing happens here. So this is the way these Blazor standalone applications are supposed to work. And now then there is this, I would say, second possibility to run Blazor WebAssembly applications. And this is by running them hosted in ASP.NET Core. And we'll also take a look at this type of application. And here, once again, this is the Visual Studio template that you get with Blazor when you start a new application. And what we can see here is that we have basically three projects. We have one project that is my app shared, which I would say represents here from a logical point of view our domain model. Then we have this my app server, which is the ASP.NET Core server, and then we have this my app client, which is the full Blazor application. Now if you look at this Blazor application here, it is really not different at all to the Blazor application that we had here. except there are some new classes here that I added separately when I was just playing around, and we'll have a new video about it regarding how we can design our components to work, and then we'll see why we created these classes. But from the structure perspective, it's exactly the same thing. So this Blazor application with this Blazor application is essentially the exact same thing. Now the only difference is that we have here also a server application, and if we look in this server application, this is a regular ASP.NET Core Razor pages combined with controllers, and we can see that here in configure services we add controllers with views, but we also add Razor pages. So this is really nothing fancy, and it doesn't clearly have to do with Blazor. But when we come to Blazor, if we go to the middleware, we see here this use Blazor framework files. And basically what this middleware does, it configures the application to serve Blazor WebAssembly framework files from the root path of the application. What this actually means, and we can see this if, for instance, we look in the launch settings.json files on the server and on the client. Let's also go here and the launch settings.json, and we see here that basically both are shipped or are served from the same host. And this is a really important scenario, because here what we have is actually an ASP.NET Core backend, and we have a Blazor frontend. And of course the Blazor frontend can communicate with the backend either via an API, or if we want to do some real-time information exchange, we can manually add a WebSockets connection to it. So for instance, if we would like to build something like, I don't know, a real-time chat application on Blazor, we would surely need to add a SignalR to the server, so that we can communicate between what happens in the browser and what should we do basically on the server, and keep all sessions or all users that wants to chat kind of in sync. So that would be a very important scenario. But once again, here these launch URLs are exactly the same, and this means that we also don't have any problems with cross-origin resource sharing. So if we make a call, an HTTP call from our Blazor WebAssembly application that still runs in the browser, and we make the call to the server, they all belong to the same host, and therefore no cross-origin resource sharing is needed. And here once again in the server application, the way that we can see that this is actually an ASP.NET Core application that also serves a Blazor WebAssembly application when it is requested, is this middleware use Blazor framework files. Anything other than this is exactly a regular ASP.NET Core application, and from Blazor perspective, it's a regular Blazor WebAssembly application. Only that, once again, in this scenario, we have a real full stack application with a domain layer, which is represented here by this shared, with a server that also probably exposes an API like this weather forecast controller, and we have a single page application client that will be shipped in the browser, and that basically runs from there. So if we run this application, we will see that we'll have actually the same Blazor template that we saw also in the previous ones. We will also be able to see if we go to this browser tools. But here once again I open this application a lot of times, so probably all the contents are cached. But if I open a new in private, but once again I forgot to open the developer tools, so let's do it once again, but open the developer tools first, and let's now try to access this application. We see that also in this case we receive all the DLLs in the browser. So this is a full-fledged Blazor WebAssembly single page application that runs in the browser. The only difference to the standalone scenario is that in this case all these files are shipped or are served by our ASP.NET Core backend server, and then we also have the client, the Blazor application that runs in the browser, that can of course make API calls to the Blazor to the ASP.NET Core server that sits behind, and everything should be fine. So once again, as a short summary, we have two different hosting models. The server-side hosting model, where everything happens on the server, all the rendering, all the logic, and all the information, all the modifications are sent to the browser via a SignalR connection. We have then the Blazor WebAssembly hosting model, when we run actually Blazor in the browser. So we ship all the DLLs in the browser and the application runs essentially there. And here we have two scenarios where we have a standalone application. We just run the application in the browser, so without any reference to any type of backend server. And this would be a great way to proceed, for instance, if we want to do some short demos and to get familiar with the Blazor programming model, how we work with components, layouts, routing, authentication, and so on. But there is also the second scenario where we have an ASP.NET Core backend server that serves a Blazor WebAssembly application, and in this case we have a full stack application with a domain layer or several layers that we have behind, like data access, whatever we need for that type of application. But we have then the server, the backend server, and then we have the client, which in this case is a real single page application, but it runs on C# and it is Blazor. It is not Angular or React or anything else. So I hope that after this video, this concept of hosting model is just a little bit more clear to you. And I guess that this is really all the basic information that you might need in order to decide, okay, what hosting model should I maybe go for if I really want to start a new Blazor project. If you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, please don't forget to subscribe and to like this video. It's really important to me to see feedback from you. Maybe also, if you have some time, just drop a comment. It would be really helpful, and I will totally appreciate that. And also, if you think that there might be other people you know, maybe peers, that might benefit from this content, and don't be shy and feel free to share it on your social media networks. And I guess that that people that really find it useful would be very thankful. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I wish you a very nice day.